Thank you for watching this online class presentation from Cedarville University. Cedarville is one of just a few Christian colleges that holds daily chapel with dynamic worship and powerful preaching. Students regularly rate chapel as one of their favorite Cedarville experiences. We invite you to learn more at cedarville.edu.
So let's get on then to today. Joel, Habakkuk, and Obadiah, are they prophets of despair or hope? And in fact, a little bit of both with emphasis on the latter. So we're going to start with a little preview. Joel, we're going to find another example of how God is the relentless pursuer. I hope you remember that terminology going all the way back to Deuteronomy and the curses where God just kept coming and coming and coming and coming. We're going to see that here today. Then also Habakkuk, which is a very different book. Not a prophet preaching doom, but rather more like reading a diary between Habakkuk and God, a private conversation. And then Obadiah, not a lot of new truth here, but absolutely timely message. And that's the key to it. So, to locate them chronologically, we'll put Joel here around 630. Not sure if that's exactly the right time. It's a little hard to tell, but probably sometime in there. Habakkuk, for certain, is about 50 years before the exile in 586. And Obadiah actually comes right after, or right on the heels of the destruction of Jerusalem in 586, and that's what makes this book so important in time. So let's start right with Joel, and the occasion that brings the whole thing about is the historical background of a terrible, horrible locust plague. And what you have in front of you there in that picture is an olive tree, which is a really important, productive agricultural thing in Israel, because you not only get olives to eat, but more importantly, olive oil to cook with and olive oil to light your houses with. So if you don't have that, that's a terrible thing. And this tree was the victim of a locust plague. These locusts are really vicious because 15 minutes later, this is what the thing looks like, right? Stripped of all the leaves, all the olives, and even the guy and his little dog are gone too. I mean, these are vicious. Okay, I'm just kidding about that, but it's absolutely true. I mean, it looks like a difference between summer and winter, but this is what a locust plague is. Now, none of us, I doubt, have ever experienced anything like that, right? So you look at that and think, okay, is that just a Bible thing or whatever? And I don't know if it's just a Bible thing or not. I think it's more of a regional thing. It's a very similar kind of thing to saying like hurricane to someone who lives in New Orleans, or fires to someone who lives in Southern California, or mudslides, or tornadoes to somebody who lives in Kansas, right? And there are certain regions that are prone to these things, and they certainly are. And when this happens, it's not just a little, well, we can go down to the grocery store and buy canned goods. What happens here in ancient Israel when the locusts come through and eat not just the olive trees, but all the wheat and everything else that goes along with it, that's when people start to starve. And that's when the people who are most vulnerable, like grandmas and grandpas, starve. And that's when the little infants and toddlers die too. So this is an incredibly serious thing. So when the locust plague comes through, people start to say, oh my goodness, how did this happen? Was this just a freak accident of nature? And Joel comes along and says, no, let me tell you, I can tell you exactly why this happens. And so as he comes, he opens up his Bible to the book of Deuteronomy and says, here it is, folks. Here's the explanation of the locust plague. It shall come to pass, if you don't obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Now, I don't want you to open up your Bibles now, but if you did, it wouldn't take you very long till you would get down to the spot where I'm sure he went to that day, which is verse 42. And locusts shall consume all your trees and the produce of your land. Here it is, right here. The relentless pursuer keeps coming and coming and coming, and he has come, and the locusts are a result of his judgment because of our sin. Now, this is the essence of Joel chapter 1. These are, of course, literal green bugs, right? But where he goes next in chapter 2 is probably here, chapter Deuteronomy 28:49. The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth, as the eagle flies, a nation whose language you will not understand. And so as Deuteronomy just keeps going down the list, Joel says, look, I mean, this plague, this locust plague is bad enough. But if you don't repent from this, if you don't get your hearts right, God's going to send something worse. And it's going to be this, a nation's going to come. And this is what Joel chapter 2 is about. Now, the interesting literary thing that Joel does is he pictures Babylonian soldiers coming as big green locusts, right? Big bugs, big human bugs coming and covering the land and eating everything up in front of them, right? So in Joel, he introduces us to this phrase called Day of the Lord that the other prophets use from here on out and even use in the New Testament, because the Day of the Lord is used by Paul and John and the book of Revelation. And so Joel kind of coins the term, and it is a day or time when God intervenes in history in a very decisive way. And it could be positive or it could be negative. It could be to judge negatively or to deliver positively his people. So in this book of Joel, there are several days of the Lord, a day when God has his way, as it were. And the first day of the Lord in Joel's day was past, right? That's chapter 1. Those were the bugs that came. But he warns of a 586 BC destruction, which, he doesn't put that date on it, but he warns about the Babylonians coming, which is in his day, yet future, right? And then he moves even beyond that to the ultimate time when God will have his day in putting a finish to all of the curse, and there will be a tribulation period. He doesn't use those words, but using the rest of the scriptures in the book of Revelation here, there is this tribulation period in the future when God will intervene to deliver his people and to judge the nations and to put an end to this age. So, as our prophets have done so much in the past, we've got a couple mountain peaks here. Joel speaks about the first one in chapter 1, about the actual literal, no kidding around bugs. Then in chapter 2, he talks about the Babylonian bugs. Apologize for the clip art, but it was kind of, at least they were green, right? Like these swarms are. And then because we got a couple, alliterative B's going on, chapter 3, I decided to call that one boom, okay? Tribulation period. The skies fall out of the sky and the moon turns to blood and all that sort of stuff. The ultimate time when the relentless pursuer is just going to come and finish all of his promises there. All right? So there you have Joel, very simply in 3 chapters, a warning. God is going to keep on coming, and he will not be denied. So with that, then, let's quickly move on to Habakkuk. Now, Habakkuk, as I said in the preview, is a very, very different kind of a book. This is not simply a preacher getting up and opening to Deuteronomy and bringing condemnation. This is a really sweet private conversation that Habakkuk has with God that we get to listen in on. And I start with this little picture that probably is so small you can't even tell what it is, but that's the side of a dam that you're looking at. Make it a little bigger here. Can you tell what's on the side of the dam here? Yeah, these are goats. These are deer, or goats, or ibex, or something. And you look up here and you can hardly even see what's going on up there, but you can see the goats down here. You realize this is a whole herd of guys, and you think, what in the world are they doing? I mean, and how do they do that? But this is the nature of goats, okay? No sound effects today, though it would have been a great idea. Here's another picture from Israel of a kind of a goat called an ibex, actually. And this is taken by the Dead Sea. And this is not one of those fake Photoshop pictures. Actually, if you could see below here, it's a 1,000-foot straight down drop, right? So this goat is not, not safe in any way. He's totally out there, but totally comfortable and happy to be there because this is the way they're built. This is what God has given them to be able to kind of run away from their enemies or go places nobody else can go. And my favorite picture is this guy. It's like, how do you do this stuff, right? But they do. Now you say, why the sermon on goatology? Well, it's because this is important to the book of Habakkuk. This is where Habakkuk kind of finishes up, and I want you to see the ability, the agility and the sure-footedness that goats have, because we're going to get there in the story of Habakkuk in a second, right? So, start out like this. Number one, this conversation that he has with God starts out like this. As Habakkuk is looking out at the people, he sees this rampant sin and neglect of God, and Habakkuk says, God, I'm tired of these people. I can't do anything with them. Why do you let this stuff continue? Would you do something about it? Right? And he speaks in these kinds of words. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you don't listen? I cry out to you, violence, but you don't save. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? He's talking about the sin of the Israelites. And so God answers him and says, well, I won't let that continue. I will do something about it. At this point, Habakkuk's thinking, well, good, do something about it, right? And so here's his answer. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to destroy Judah. Habakkuk says, whoa, hold on, that's not what I was going for. But this is his answer. Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. This is God speaking. For I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places that do not belong to them. Now, you and I look back and think, well, how in the world is that supposed to be surprising or unbelievable? Because we know the Babylonians did this. Well, that's the nice part about looking back over history, right? Hindsight is 20/20. But the truth is that at this point in time, that Babylon was this little backwater country, right? Assyria was the big bad bully. It's almost as though I say to you, 5 years from now, a foreign nation is going to overtake the United States and destroy us militarily. Guess who it would be? China or Russia. And I say, nope, it's Puerto Rico. They're the ones that are going to do it. Mm-hmm. You say, yeah, that's how people felt about Babylon. But Habakkuk says, or God says to him, look, in 50 years, here's what the map is going to look like. Babylon's going to raise up to the point where they destroy Assyria, and then they will come and take over you. And so this brings the next question in Habakkuk's mind. God, this is a bad idea. Let's not pursue this plan, okay? Don't you think it's inconsistent for you to use wicked Babylon to punish Judah? Huh? Come on now. You got to admit this is a good point. Habakkuk says, look, O Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, we will not die, will we? O Lord, you've appointed them to execute judgment. O Rock, you've ordained them to punish. God, don't do this. Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? This is a bad idea. They are wicked, God. Don't you realize this? And God responds and comes back with this, and he says, wow, point taken, Habakkuk, you're right. They are wicked. They do deserve judgment, and here's what. I will also punish Babylon for her sin eventually. That is, after they have destroyed Judah. And so he comes through with some condemnations and some woes that God is going to bring on Babylon eventually, but not until they destroy Judah. So it's not like Habakkuk has caused this necessarily, but he's kind of thinking to himself, oh man, what kind of trouble have I got myself into here? I kind of painted myself in a corner. I asked God to act, and now he's going to act, but Israel is going to be destroyed here. So he comes up with then a third request or a third question, and he says, are we finished as a nation? And that's a really good question to ask. Because if Babylon comes along and smashes the temple and destroys everything and carries everyone off, have we not reached the end of Deuteronomy 28? Is this not the exile? Is it not all over? Now, I don't remember if it's happened exactly in this section. I think it has, but I'm not sure. You guys ask good questions, really good questions. Sometimes someone will ask a question that's so good that I'll say, I'm not going to answer that. Have I done that with you? Because sometimes the question is so good and so insightful, I want you to figure out the answer to it. Because I want you to own that the answer, right? I don't want to just tell you it's so good, I want you to figure it out. And I get the impression that right here in Habakkuk chapter 3, when Habakkuk says to God, are we finished as a nation? That God says to him, Habakkuk, that is so good, I'm not going to answer it. You figure it out. And so what happens in this chapter 3 is that we have an answer by Habakkuk. God says, figure it out. You can do it. You figure it out. And Habakkuk says, okay, well then here's what I'm thinking. Now, this answer he gives is fascinating. It is, in fact, a studied review of God's work in the past. He goes and he looks back at the trajectory which God has set out, and he brings it up to the present day, and he says, okay, based on what God has done in the past and bringing this up here, are we finished as a nation? Now, as he does that, some of the references he makes are kind of vague, and when you first start out, you're like, what's he talking about? But stay with it, and you can figure out where he's going. Watch this. He starts out in verses 3 to 4, and he says, God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. Like, pause and think about that. And I look at it and think about what? I don't even know what that means, right? But evidently, Habakkuk, in his mind, has this memory of God working powerfully in the past. And watch as he continues. The further he goes, the clearer it gets. His glory covered the heavens, his praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise, rays flashed from his hand where his power was hidden. God had been kind of quiet, but all of a sudden, man, he let it go, and he acted powerfully. Okay, it's getting a little more specific, but I still don't understand. And then he says this, plague went before him. So there's kind of a key word, right? So when did God act powerfully with plagues? Answer, sounds like Egypt, doesn't it, right? Pestilence followed his steps. He stood and he shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble, talking about Egypt. And then this, it's kind of a sarcastic question, but it's interesting. Were you angry with the rivers, O Lord? Was your wrath against the streams? So, you got to think back, when was there a time when God kind of beat up on rivers? Well, when you start to think about it, there was the Nile, kind of got beat up on, right? And then there was the Jordan, kind of got cut in two. And if you keep going, there was that Red Sea that kind of got beat up a little bit and cut in two as well, which he talks about next. Did you rage against the sea and when you rode with your horses? So the sarcastic rhetorical question is, were you angry with the rivers? Right? Begs the response, well, of course he wasn't angry. He didn't look and say, oh, you bad Nile, look what you've done now. What was God doing when he turned the Nile to blood? What was God doing when he cut the Jordan off? The answer is he was fulfilling promises that he made to his people. He wasn't angry. He was fulfilling promises. He went to great lengths and did miraculous things to fulfill promises for his people. And then the sun and the moon stood still. Only one place I can think of where that happens, and that's in the book of Joshua, right? Where God again was giving the land to his people and doing miracles in order to make those promises come true. You crushed the leader of the land of wickedness, that is Pharaoh. You stripped him from head to foot, Selah. So where's he going all this? Well, I think where he's going is this. He said, I heard and my heart pounded, my lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. Right? He's putting this all together and he says, look, when I realize this message that Babylon is coming, it makes me sick down deep into my bones. Yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us. Why? Because of this. This is some of the most beautiful poetry in all the Old Testament. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, as I look out here, there's going to be absolutely no outward circumstance by which I should be encouraged at all. Yet, verse 18, I will rejoice in the Lord. I'll be joyful in my Savior. Why? Because as I look at what God has done in the past, the way He's miraculously fulfilled His promises so far, He wouldn't take us this far to stop and quit now. I know He will see us through. Is 586 coming? Yes. Will we be destroyed? Yes. Is God going to give up on His promises to us? Answer, no. No. And so the last verse then is this. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to go on the heights. And what you've got here is a picture of a Habakkuk and people look at him and say, how can you be cheerful? How can you do that? How does a deer do that? And look at Habakkuk, how do you do that? And the answer is because I know who I believe, and I know His promises are true, and I know He won't give up. That's amazing. I could never do that. Yeah, but by faith, you can live that way, right? And this book is so sweet to me because A couple of years ago, the night before I had to teach it in class in a November day, my dad and I were visiting my mom in a nursing home. She had become needed so much care, he couldn't provide all that care. And at the nursing home, we could see her going downhill quickly, but we just didn't know. It was hard to chart, right? Is she gonna get better? Is she gonna improve? Is she gonna get worse? And it just grieved us, and we spent so much time there with her. And this night, just before this class, the head nurse came to us and said to us, guys, have you thought about hospice? It's like, oh man. That word just grabbed our hearts because we knew what that meant, right? And I said, we've kind of wondered about it, but we didn't want to say it, but is that where we are? And the answer was, yeah, that's exactly where you are. And that's when I realized, okay, in every other instance in my life where something was bad, I could almost always swerve around or bob and weave and get away, but I realized this one was coming head on, and there was no getting around this. Right? And some of you have actually had to face that. Again, as we talked about in Ecclesiastes, many of you have not, but someday you will. I don't say that with any joy, but I do say this, that when those times come when there is bad news on the horizon and there are no cattle in the stalls and there is no perceptible reason to be confident, you have to know where you're going to go. Because those times come, where are you going to go? And Habakkuk goes back and says, has God brought us this far to give up on us now? And his response is, no. I can do this because of who God is, right? And then, man, 2 years later than that, almost the same sequence in November, my sister-in-law called and told us about her daughter, Hannah, my niece, who was a freshman at Liberty at the time. And she and a couple of her friends, 2 worship majors and 2 Bible majors, there were 5 of them together, wanted to go stargazing, and the very best place to do that in Lynchburg is to go out in this train trestle that's 200 feet above the river, the James River. And what they didn't realize was that if you get out there and it's a beautiful, beautiful place to see the stars, when the train comes around the corner, you don't have enough time to get back. And so the train came around, and a couple of guys started to run, and 2 of the guys made it. A couple of the girls jumped off where there were steep slopes, and one girl got hurt really badly. But Hannah didn't make it. Hannah got run over by the train. And for my sister-in-law, who had been forsaken by her husband, Hannah was her life, her only daughter, and the loss was just unspeakable. And so she came up to Lynchburg from where she lived, and she wanted to see the friends. Now, if you were one of those friends, you can imagine the anticipation you'd have, not only the survivor's guilt, if you've ever studied that sort of thing, why did I make it and they didn't, but also the guilt of, man, we were in that group and we decided to go out there and we took her only daughter, what is she going to say to us? Right? And Terry, Hannah's mom, got them together and said, look, I just want you to know that last Thursday night, Hannah had an appointment with God that she couldn't miss. And I don't want you to feel guilty. I want you to live your lives for the Lord. I want you to see as many people come to Him as you can. Hannah is in heaven now, and what she would want and what I want is for you to not feel guilty or to look back, but to look forward and to live your lives for God as dedicated as you possibly can. I want you to know that Hannah loved you, and I love you, and I forgive you, and it's okay. I want you to do things for God. Now, of all the things she could have said, that's exactly what they needed to hear. How do you do that kind of thing? God makes deer to do that, and He makes people of faith to say things like that. And what Habakkuk is all about is the just shall live by faith, not just get saved by faith, but live by faith so that when the hard times come, and when they do, you can respond correctly because your sights are focused exactly on the God who doesn't change. That's the story of Habakkuk, best I can tell you. And let's take a look at one more, little Obadiah, really fast, okay? Obadiah, I only got 1 chapter read last night. I hope you got the whole book done. I like Obadiah because it's short and sweet. In fact, I like his name. I just like Obadiah. In fact, I offer extra credit for anybody in my class who will name their firstborn Obadiah. I did it one time, and one kid took me up on it. He said, his name was Joe Canabla. He said, Dr. Miller, I will do it on one condition, that I can give the boy a middle name of Juan. And I said, why? So I can call him Obi-Wan Canabla. Okay. That works. I gave him extra credit just for that. It's pretty clever. I don't know if you ever had a kid or not, but it was pretty fun. All right, so here's what's going on in Obadiah. I got to tell you a really quick story first to set the whole thing up, because it's not new content, it's about the timing. So here's my story, all right? Years ago when I was teaching, before I came to Cedarville, I was teaching up in upstate New York, and I decided it was time to go to Dallas Seminary for my doctoral work, right, my PhD, and it was in the winter, it was in December, and I decided to pack up sold our house, packed up my wife and our two kids, age 3 and 1, and we put all our stuff in a Ryder rental truck and towed the car on behind. And my buddy, Dave, and I were going to travel 1,700 miles, 3 days worth, take this truck to Dallas. My wife was going to get on a plane with the two kids and fly down to Dallas, and then Dave was going to fly back on the same ticket. You could do it back in those days. So we work all day, we get the truck all full, and we decide we're so excited because of the adrenaline, let's just leave now. So we do. About 2 hours down the road, it's icy, it's snowy, it's nasty, and we're beat, and we decide, okay, let's pull off and rest. So we do. Well, I didn't think this far ahead. There's no place to rest, right? I give him the bench seat, and I'm laying down on the floor, and the transmission is sticking in my belly like this. We're trying to sleep. After about 45 minutes, the cab gets so cold, you just freezing. So you get up and drive till you can't keep your eyes open, and then you lay down and freeze. And it's just a horrible night. I got so sick I couldn't talk. I was supposed to pass. To do this doctoral work, you have to know Greek and Hebrew and German and French. And I hadn't studied German like I should have because I did it in high school. I thought, I'll brush up on the way down. I get my German book out, and the truck is bouncing so hard it gives me a headache, and I can't do that. And I think, oh man, I'm just going to flunk the test. We eventually get down to Dallas, and it's nice and sunny, and so I jump out of the truck, and I land on the ground, and there's ice, and I slip and fall and bust my elbow. I'm thinking, this is not the way it's supposed to work. And we go into the apartment complex where we're going to stay, and the landlord opens up the door, and the roaches just run everywhere. It's like, I'm not staying here. I only knew one guy in Dallas, and I said, Paul, can I come over and stay at your house? He said, well, you can't stay at the house, not big enough, but you can stay in our garage. So my buddy Dave leaves, my wife flies down, there I am with the two kids, 3 and 1, in a garage with no place to live, knowing I'm sick, I'm going to flunk the German exam, and I just say, honey, let's just get back in the truck and just go back to New York. This is a horrible idea, this is stupid, I'm a terrible husband, I feel bad, I'm just going to absolutely fail. And at that point, she said, no. And I said, why not? And she said, it's going to sound corny, but this is absolutely true. She said, because I love you. And I said to her, are you sure? Because I did not feel lovable at all. I said, this is terrible. I can't do this. And if my wife has very few faults, but her biggest fault is that she has way too much confidence in my abilities, right? She says, I know you can do this. And I said, I don't think I can. She says, yes, you can. I love you and you can do this. Now she says that stuff to me all the time. But that day, I will never forget. And we went on, it gave us the emotional courage to keep going. We found an apartment where we stayed. It was the 2 best years of our life. It was the best foundation for what I teach you here all the time. And it was just really, really amazing decision. It was her choice. And the fact that she said, I love you, you can do this, it was not a new message, but the timing of it was just perfect. If you can get that, you can get Obadiah, right? Because here's what happens in Obadiah. What happens in Obadiah is 586 comes along. The siege of Jerusalem takes place. A few survivors escape, and they head south. And Edomites come from the east over here, and they meet them, and they take advantage, and they loot them, and they rob them, and they abuse them. And at that point right there, the book of Obadiah comes along and God says, I saw what you did, Edom. I'm going to get you for that. Now, why is that important? Well, that's important because unless God still cares for Israel, he wouldn't care about avenging Edom. So this little book comes along. We can almost read it all right here, right? Your warriors, O Edom, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountains will be cut down in the slaughter. Let me just skip to the end here. On the day you stood aloof while strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. You should not march to the gates of my people in the day of their disaster. You should not look down on them in their calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives. And then he says this, as you have done, it'll be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. And I hope you're reading carefully enough that you can hear the echoes of Genesis 12. I'm still blessing those who bless you and cursing those who curse you. Why is that a good message? Not because it's new, but because of the time. Because now, just right here in 586, the law, the covenant, Deuteronomy has been broken because the people broke it. But just because that's broken doesn't mean this is. Those one-sided commitments are still there. So let me just say it like this. In Obadiah, God is saying to Israel, I'm still cursing those who curse you, because even though the Mosaic covenant may be broken, the promises to Abraham will never be forgotten. So that little book just has Genesis 12 there and there and there and there and there written all over it. And when Israel was undergoing this, God is saying, I still love you. And Israel at this point in time is saying, are you sure? And God says, yeah. Yep, I still do. Mosaic covenant is over. Genesis 12 is still here. Those are still unconditional promises I made to you that I will keep. And that, best I know it, is the story of Obadiah.